Several years ago, I had the privilege to hear John Pruitt speak. Y'all know John Pruitt well from his work many, many years in Atlanta television. Many of those years on Channel 11 and then many more of those years on Channel 2. Having had the opportunity to hear him speak and know others that know him, John Pruitt is just a fantastic journalist with impeccable integrity. As he talked to us at Rotary that day, he was talking about where news had come from and where it is now. Think about when he began in the 60s and the 70s when the 6 o'clock news was a 30-minute period of time. And you had to squeeze it all in, and that as he was speaking, that he would go do 2 hours of evening news because evening news was no longer just a public service, but it generated tremendous revenue for the television station. And so as a person of integrity, a journalist with high standards, he was struggling with how it was that you maintain journalistic integrity in an era where it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep the attention of people. Because now not only was there just not a 30-minute block of time at 6 o'clock in the evening, but news channels ran stories 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our appetite and hunger for both the important news and the salacious news of the day has grown stronger. And so he was asked during this meeting, how is it that you balance this carefully? And I love this quote. He talked about, before his quote, he's talking about how difficult it is to keep viewers watching if you're just giving that news that you know is important. And he said this, we try to keep them in the tent. You can't save souls if they're not in the tent. We try to keep them in the tent. You can't save souls if they're not in the tent. We've got to show up. Now, today I'm doing what they've said for years. I'm preaching to the choir because y'all are all here. You showed up this morning. You got up this morning and you could have done a lot of other things, I'm sure. We're all busy. We're too busy. Our schedules become crunched from both ends. Every once in a while, we just need a day to catch up. Sunday mornings can be a really good day to do that. It's quiet. They don't probably expect you at work or wherever you spend your days. You could get up on Sunday morning, you could sleep in, have a little coffee, a little breakfast, and do some things throughout the day. But those of us in this room this morning know if we don't show up, we might miss something. If we don't show up, we might miss the opportunity to hug a dear friend, to hear a good Sunday school lesson. If I keep working hard, you might miss the opportunity to hear a pretty good sermon. You know you're going to have the opportunity, and you might miss hearing this choir, our musicians. You might miss the opportunity for a good meal. As I was looking through the scripture, and I was thinking about what it meant to show up, as I was thinking about showing up to hear Jesus, when you start looking through the scripture, you realize that back then people showed up. And not just by the tens or not just by the hundreds, but by the thousands. In Matthew's gospel, we hear about the Sermon on the Mount, and just before that, Jesus went throughout Galilee teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all who were sick. And great crowds followed him from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. They were coming from all over. They were showing up to hear Jesus. We have to remember that the people showed up because they had heard that Jesus could heal, that Jesus' words were comforting and brought peace. People were blind and they could see. Many incredible things happened if folks would just show up. Now, I told you of this quote, and looking online, I found the Georgia Encyclopedia, and it talked about these camp meetings in the summer. So these camp meetings began to be a time where people could hear the good news preached. They could come together for a few days, 4 or 5 days, and camp out, listen to preaching pretty much from dusk till dawn. It says this, that camp meetings were popular with rural Georgians. Not only a time for spiritual renewal, camp meetings were also gathering grounds where families and friends could reunite. In the 19th century, most Georgians were farmers who lived in solitary, demanding lives. Camp meetings were festive affairs celebrated annually at a time when crops were laid by, thus providing a reprieve from the rigorous routine of farm life. I don't know about y'all, but I grew up going to family reunion every year about this time. We actually gathered first or second Sunday in September out in Snellville. Y'all know where Snellville is, out 78? They say everybody's somebody in Snellville. We would gather for the Phillips family reunion. When I was a little boy, we gathered at Briscoe Park. And one time I came down the slide right into the middle of a mud puddle. We were a long way from home. That made for a long family reunion. After a while, we made our way over to the armory there on 78, and we would gather. But we would gather, and you could see those vestiges of camp meeting left over, because as we gathered together as family, we would eat a tremendous meal. People would bring the very best that they had. We would share fried chicken and vegetables and homemade biscuits and mashed potatoes and gravy and tea so sweet it'd make your mouth pucker. But then when the food was beginning to be cleared and everybody was beginning to kind of sit back in their chair, a few of my family members would get up and we'd start singing hymns. Most of my folks out there are Baptists, so they can sing some hymns. They just won't dance with you, but they'll sing some hymns. And we'd start singing, and someone would pray. And we'd give thanks for our family and the many members of our family that for so many years had been gathering in that place, had been coming together to celebrate each other and to give thanks for God, for our family, and for all that which God had blessed our family with. As I answered my call to the ministry, and when I used to be able to make it quickly from church to the reunion, I remember what an honor it was. The first time my cousin Harold and my Aunt Tansy asked me to have the blessing at the family reunion. What a special time that was to give thanks over that food that had been prepared the same way for many, many years. I left out the cream corn. You can't have family reunion without some cream corn. So folks gathered from all over. They came together to eat, to fellowship. People began to show up to see Jesus because they believed by merely being in his presence, their lives could be changed. I love the story of the woman who decided if she could just but touch the fringe of his garment, if she could just get close enough to be in his general vicinity, that which had ailed her for years could be healed. As the crowds crushed in around Jesus, he stopped and he looked to his disciples and he said, "Who touched me?" And the disciples said, "Jesus, there's hundreds and thousands of people around you. They're all pressing in against you. How is it that we're going to know?" He said, "I felt the power go forth from me." The woman walked up to him in fear and trembling, afraid that she had done something wrong, and he looked at her and he said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." She was willing to show up. She wasn't guaranteed anything, but she showed up. And she didn't just show up, but she showed up expecting a miracle. She showed up believing that Christ could make a difference in her life. She showed up.